Opera House. Anna and I have been for the last few years researching businesses. And in doing that, we look for advertisements. And we were just overwhelmed by the number of advertisements that there were for the Earlville Opera House in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we were on a quest. We were going to find where this building was. We were sure it was ornate. We were sure it was just a wonderful thing. Except for what we found out was it was not a house at all. And what occurred back in those days was that most of the people would take a hall in a downtown area and they would refer to it as an opera house. So what we found in, you can see these are a couple of the different playbills from back then. So everything back then was all live entertainment, obviously. So I'm going to take a couple of more recent slides to show you where those opera houses or halls were at. Both of them were on Railroad Street, directly across from each other, actually. So you can see this picture is probably from the early 1950s. That's Turner Bailey riding his bike across the street there. Just to get yourself acclimated, most people remember this, a few younger people won't, but in 1980, this building was torn down to make way for the new Pioneer, or was it Earlville National Bank at the time, or National Bank of Earlville. So this was a three-front building that was often referred to as the Dupee building, because Dupee was a group of brothers that had a dry goods store back in the day. And the reason I bring this up is that this doorway right here, which was within that building, does anybody remember what was written on this glass? Right here on Railroad Street. It said IOOF. I remember reading that when I would walk down the street as a kid. And it was the hall for meetings of the Oddfellows. Right, and what Laverle remembers is that there were dances up there all the time. I'm sure maybe other people in here, I mean, Ron and I talk about, he remembers his parents going to dances up there and taking him as a little boy and sitting him on the stage, you know. So this was a hallway, a dance floor up here, and that became, in the late 1800s, one of the things that was referred to as the Earlville Opera House. Then across the street, now this is a little older picture, but again, it was one that would give us an idea. You recognize the bank building here. So this is on the north side. This was Kramer's bank building drugstore. And this drugstore is actually where Street started before they moved to Ottawa Street. But there was a doorway here, and you will still see it if you drive down that street. It just looks different because of the changes in the old leader office. There was a doorway that went up to that hallway, which was up in this area here. So those were the two spots that were really considered the Earlville Opera House. Now, in 1892, Thomas Edison and a guy by the name of William, I'm not going to say his name, Dixon. Anyway, they invented the kinetograph, and that's what allowed us to see motion pictures for the first time. So in like 1894, kinetograph parlors started becoming popular. And in Earlville, that kinetograph parlor actually was called the White Star Theater. Now you might notice that in these ages, they kind of overlap, so some were on one side of the street, some were on the other. This one happened to be on the north side of the street, and it was called the White Star Theater. This guy, it was managed and built there by Charles Fanistock, who was a lawyer. And so this was the first place to actually show moving pictures. There was a lot of references to it being the Nickelodeon as well. And I looked up the definition of Nickelodeon, and it just means that it's a hall where motion pictures can be shown, and you only charged a nickel, hence the name Nickelodeon. let's see. There was a group called the Kennedy Electric Theater Company, which was a traveling company, and we see those in advertisements a lot, that they're going to be there. Along with, again, they still did some vaudeville shows there. There still was some live entertainment, but now we've moved on to motion pictures. And one of their bills said that, this was, all these live acts were going to happen, and it would be followed by the usual 3,000 feet of film that would be shown. Now this guy also, all right, so he only had this for a year, right? 1909 to 1910. And then he sold it. But right after he sold it, I can find in the city council minutes where he went and asked if he could build an air dome. He wanted a permit to build an air dome. Does anybody know what an air dome is? I had no idea what an air dome was. So I looked it up. This is an example of an air dome. I guess they were very popular in the early 1900s. And he was going to take a vacant space, again, downtown, which at the time, the only vacant space that I could see would have been right next to the bowling alley. Many of us remember when there was a vacant space right next to the bowling alley on the south side. And he was going to take it, put opera seating there, erect a screen, and basically what that says to me is it's a drive-in without the cars, right? But because everything was so stuffy and no airflow in those halls, this was seen to be a great option, unless it rained or snowed or all those other things. So then we come to Frank Edgett, who was
my grandmother's brother.
Laverle's grandmother's brother.
My great-uncle.
Okay. Frank Edgett was, like many business people, not afraid of risk. I mean, we were just amazed at the people back then that knew that they were going to succeed at whatever they did. They didn't care. So, for example, Frank, who built the original Lyric Theater, which we'll talk about in a minute, he owned a restaurant and bakery for probably 15 years. Then he quit that. Then he built a grocery store, ran a grocery store for about another 7. And then he took off and went to South Dakota and ran a restaurant there for a year, and then he came back. And in 1911, he built the original Lyric Theater on Railroad Street. And so you're saying, what do you mean the Lyric Theater on Railroad Street? It was always across the street. Well, Frank was the one who put it up initially. He ran 2 shows a night. So I don't know if you can, this isn't a great picture, but again, this is the north side of Railroad Street, right? This was the bank would have been in these 2 areas right here. And right here, which would be where Los Dos Amigos is right now. That helps. The old leader office. You can see the marquee, it's not the marquee, but he's got placards outside that are advertising what's going to be shown. And this one is a better picture of just the front. I wish we had a picture like this of the other Lyric Theater. So this doorway on the left isn't part of the theater. It goes upstairs. And remember how I was talking to you about those halls before? This would have been the way to get up to that hall, over that. Yep. I wanted to read you just a little bit about, this is when the Lyric Theater opened, this Lyric Theater opened, in addition to, of course, describing in detail, like they did back then. It says the latest and most popular films will be secured, and it is the intention to give the people of this section the best there is in the motion picture line. So there's your promise, kids. That's what's going to happen here. And he did that for a couple of years. His business plan, by the way, was that he would do advanced ticket sales. So he would secure all the money first before he would contract with the films so that he didn't lose any money. Smart business guy. So then in 1914, 3 years later, he decided that the community needed something better. They needed a big, beautiful new theater. And so he built the Lyric Theater. And I'm going to refer back to this picture later. This is really the earliest picture that we have of it, and it says 1920s, but I'm going to maybe dispute that. Yeah, Robin?
How late did Frank Edgett remain in Earlville?
He
When did he leave?
he ran the theater until 1927, and he sold it then. And I'm not sure what he did after that. Do you know? We can probably look him up in the family thing, because we've got a lot of information on him. Okay, so what's here? Oh, also in that time, he started Lyric Theater in Pawpaw, and he also started showing motion pictures in Leland as well. So when he built the theater initially, Clara, his wife, operated the player piano, because of course, again, we're talking about motion pictures without any sound. And so the description of the new theater talks about how it was best arranged, best lighted, best ventilated moving picture of any town around. Wide aisles to the orchestra pit, and up on the stage, everything is first class. Then they end with peanut cracking and spitting on the floor is prohibited in the new house, and it is hoped that all patrons will have regard enough for the proprieties to make no trouble in this regard. Thursday night, the house was filled to overflowing, standing room being at a premium, and over 100 people couldn't get in. So it just is a example of how much people flocked to this kind of entertainment during that time. So Frank Edgett sold the theater to Bill Huff, another relative of Lavero's, in 1927, and 3 years later, the Vitaphone system had been invented, and that was the thing that eventually brought us talkies. Eventually was able to, it first brought music to the film, and then after that it brought synchronized with dialogue. And so this was the opening night of Talkies in Town. This was June 11th and 12th, 1930, and it was on with the show. Multicolored as the rainbow, gay with girls, opening night for Talkies at the theater. And then in 1932, a very young Chuck Dias and his wife Gloria first rented and then purchased the Lyric Theater from Bill Huff. Now, looking back to see how old they were when they did this, they were in their 20s. Again, risk takers, people who didn't really give much thought to what would happen if they failed. Chuck had already operated either as a projectionist or as a manager of theaters for 10 years by that time. He was in Sandwich, he was in Mendota, several places before he came here. So he wasn't new to the business at all. And within that 10 years of time, he developed a lot of really important connections. And that becomes important as we move forward here. Because in the 20s and 30s, there was a restrictive covenants kind of for releasing movies. So first run movies were always went to the big, large theaters first. And if you were within 25 miles of there, you could not open with that first run film. Matter of fact, it could have been a whole year or whatever afterwards. But what Chuck figured out was that Earlville was in a unique situation that he was beyond that. And so he was able to get first run movies here in Earlville much sooner than a lot of the other places had. Of course, he continued to have live acts as well. He was, I love this one, Mr. Fun and Mr. Gun, Bob Hope, Jane Russell, Roy Rogers, and Trigger, and the son of Paleface. Chuck was a devoted community supporter. How many people here remember Chuck Dias? Okay, a lot. And not only was he a mayor for multiple terms here in town, but his support of the war effort, of schools, and of the city in general was overwhelming all of the years that he was here. You think about the young couple who came to town and bought this place in 1932. What was happening then?
Depression.
That was the Great Depression. So that even makes that risk seem even bigger. And he succeeded regardless. For support of the war, he sponsored scrap metal drives. He promoted war bonds. He gave free admission to all military. He made available the war reels because, again, no TV. And of course, he was famous for other things, such as bike giveaways. And the way that happened was kind of a community event. Everybody supported everybody else. So if you spent $1 at a store in Earlville, you got a ticket. And for every $1 you spent that week, you got a ticket. And then it went into a drawing at the Lyric, and then whoever's ticket was drawn received a new bike. Gary Wolfe talks about this a lot in the things that he's written or in interviews. And my understanding is that Gary still has that bike in his office at home. And then there was a Sunbeam Girl look-alike contest. Who knows what Sunbeam was? Sunbeam Bread, right? And remember the little girl? Remember the little girl in the blue dress and everything? Well, we have a Sunbeam Girl contestant here today. Connie Miller was a Sunbeam Girl contestant. Penny Goldman, right? Anybody else that I'm missing?
My sister Sharon was.
Okay. And how did that go? How did that work? Was it just...
I don't remember all of it, but I do remember the Sunbeam Girl. She looked exactly like the girl on the loaf of bread, and I don't know where she was from or anything. She was blonde and everything.
And I looked at, I mean, it wasn't just Earlville that did that. This was like a national thing where they, advertisements for Sunbeam Bread, I'm sure. But anyway, they did the look-alike contest. Chuck gave a free movie to all the kids at Christmas, no matter where you were from. And again, his support for school activities was also well noted. So the first real production after he and Gloria took over was the Grand Hotel, and that was dubbed the Triumph of the Talkies. So 5 years after, at his 5-year anniversary, which would have been 1937, there was an article in the newspaper where they interviewed him after 5 years, and well, what changes have you made, and all that type of thing. And of course, he said he put in cushioned seats and did some painting to the walls. And he also, one of the things that caught my eye is that he said he put an overhang canopy on the front. So now I'm going to go back to this that says it's 1920. And I don't know whether this is, maybe he changed the canopy, but this to me looks like maybe the first canopy that would have gone on. Otherwise, I think it would have said a new one or whatever. So we oftentimes get pictures or items up here that say they're from Earlville, and they're maybe from Earlville, Iowa, or Earlville, New York, or Earlville, Minnesota, or they'll have a date on them that isn't necessarily when the date was. So it's a conundrum. We don't know. But in that 5-year anniversary interview, he did say that he had put a canopy over the street. And then I found this. So in 1949, this was in the newspaper, and it was the proposed remodel of the Lyric Theater. Now, I can't find anything past that. Obviously, it didn't get done because our photos of the Lyric Theater don't look anything like this. But I thought it was interesting that they had a whole different thought of how they might go about doing that. At that 5-year anniversary, there was this little description was written up. It says the Lyric has 400 seats, because I always wondered how big was it. Because that was the other thing that he did, was he added seats. He added balcony seats on both sides of the viewing or the film room. So it says the Lyric has 40 seats, no central air conditioning, and for years, no indoor toilets. And during its prime on a hot or cold weekends, moviegoers would fill every available seat, including the 12 seats in each of the 2 balconies. These balcony seats often went to teenage couples who wanted privacy to hold hands and, if no one watched, kiss. Among the high school students at the time, the Lyrics balconies fostered more than one romance. You can't speak to that, can you, liberal? She knows a person. So this is our best picture of the Lyric Theater, and I'm really hoping that someone can come forward and find a picture of it looking straight on. But this is how I remember it looking. Now it was closed before I ever was old enough to go to a movie there. But as a little kid, back when it was safe, my mom would let me walk uptown with my dog. And I remember going by it. It was closed, and I can remember looking in the glass and seeing a Morton salt container sitting up on the popcorn machine. That's my knowledge of the Lyric Theater downtown. And why I remember stuff like that, who knows? So the other thing about Chuck Dias is that he was very forward-thinking. And during the mid to late 1950s, he could see that the attendance started to wane. TV had come out, more people were watching shows at home, and everybody was obsessed with their cars. And so in his mind, he knew that this wasn't going to last forever, and so that was when he made the determination to build the drive-in. So we're going to talk about that in a minute, but before we do, I want Wilma to say, we were walking out of church together the other day, and she said, now, you're going to talk about hates, aren't you? And I said, hates? No, I said, I didn't find out anything from hates in my research, so Wilma, talk about that.
Well, Chuck Haight had the gun shop out there where he lived, when you came off of Moyer's Curve and then the first road going to your left. And one night a week, he would show movies out there, and I can't remember if he put up some kind of a screen or if he showed it on a building, but I remember we would take our blankets and make our popcorn and take our thing of Kool-Aid, and we would sit out there and watch the movie, and we were allowed to go inside and buy one ice cream bar or a popsicle, whatever, and sit out there. But they came from all over. In fact, I talked to a couple from Mendota last night when she called about the storm, and her husband says, oh yeah, we used to come over there.
So now you know, what was that? What did he have?
That was the Diamond M trading post.
Yeah, but he had an air dome, right? Didn't he have an air dome?
He had a portable screen that he put up to show the movie.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was on a building or a screen. That he
So that's
put
a
up.
screen.
This is a big sheet.
Okay, so in 1954, even before the Lyric was closed, Chuck Dias went out and he bought 7 acres of land west of town from Sam Thompson and, tell me again, Phil Swayze, who owned that out there. And he entered into a contract with Ballantine Company, who was a major supplier of theater equipment. But of course he used all local contractors because that's the kind of guy he was. And so this is a picture of the drive-in, but the problem with it is that on opening night, the screen wasn't up yet. And I want to read this because the Dias kids who wrote this information did such a great job of putting this together. So it said the Dias Drive-In Theater grand opening was planned for June 11th, 1954 with a gala-free showing. Only one slight problem remained. The screen had yet to be raised. Early on the morning of the 11th, the construction crew and a large crane arrived to erect the screen prior to that night's opening show. Throughout the day, as events went slowly, workers and family pleaded with Chuck to postpone the grand opening. After all, even if the screen was up, no picture had yet been projected and no one would know for sure if all the precise measurements would work and the picture could actually hit the screen. But Chuck insisted on continuing, arguing that he had promised the people a free movie that night and he was going to deliver it even if he had to put up a sheet. As the fated hour neared and darkness approached, a crowd of cars started to fill in, curiously watching the construction crew. At the last light of the day, the last giant bolt was inserted into into the base, and the crane was moved out of the projector's line of light. Quickly, as over 100 car horns began blaring, Chuck and his son Ron and John and Pops Hamilton ran inside the projection room and ignited the carbon arc projector. Then, as the crew inside the projector room turned on the first projector and the light hit the film and traveled to the screen, Chuck realized his measurements were off by just inches. "No problem," he shouted as he ran outside the projection room with a hammer and a chisel and began to chip away at the concrete block to allow the full light to hit the screen. Amid hoopla, suspense and excitement, the Dias 34 drive-in theater was born. So, you know, you think about the number of people between the Lyric and the drive-in that were of people in town that were given jobs. You had projectionists, you had ushers, you had people that sold popcorn and took tickets. And so a lot of people in town were touched by both of these businesses. Matter of fact, it's mentioned that some of the projectionists at the Lyric Theater were Chuck Howey, Pops Hamilton, Charles House, Merrill Haas, and of course the Dias kids. And Charles House went on to become the supervisor of projection department at Universal Studios in Hollywood. Go figure. So their grand opening was planned and eventually went through, as we mentioned. And just like the Lyric, there was more at the theater than just the theaters, or just the movies. Here you can go and see a beautiful girl buried alive in a bikini on this theater grounds on August 9th and 10th, plus 2 big features. So there was far more to see than that. And I loved his marketing motto was to save the cost of a babysitter to come to the theater.
Kris, that's where I met my wife. She was working at the concession stand there.
Oh, well, there you go. That wasn't in the back rows then, right?
Right.
Kris, I don't know if Rich Sutton is here, but his dad and my dad dug all the post holes for the
Really?
theaters, yes.
Cool.
That was his local.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm sure there was
On the
a...
back of a tractor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And of course there was more than a few extracurricular activities that generally happened at the drive-in. I've been told that in the dark of the night, the back rows were coveted spots for romance and for underage drinking. And it's said that Chuck knew every person that tried to sneak in the trunk of their car. Larry, are you raising?
I got caught. We had I don't know what you call him, like a judge here in town, a whitey, and he charged me $8. And I was only making $1 an hour. So it cost me a day's wages.
Well, I was guilty. I got caught too, but all I got was escorted out of the. I didn't have to pay any fines or anything, and it wasn't my idea. So.
The ticket price back then was 65 cents.
Yep. 65 cents. And now, I don't know what it costs now, but it's it's cash only if you come. And, well, you know, just to kind of move through a couple of these slides of pictures there. Of course, we all remember the speakers that scratched the glass on your, and had the crackly sounds. Now it's all digital. Great picture of the inside, and I can't remember who gave us this, Anna. Did John Dias send
Yes,
it?
John.
Okay. I love this picture, and I don't know if this picture is from the Lyric or the drive-in. Does anybody know? But it's just such a great picture of him with the...
That's from the drive-in.
That's from the drive-in. Okay, I do have it in the right spot then. So Chuck was in the theater business for 62 years before he retired. And Ron Magnoni purchased the drive-in in 1994. Probably someone who loved theater and all things film as much as what Chuck did, and that's really what you needed. Ron Magnoni had the theater for 30 years before he died unexpectedly this year, which was a very sad thing for not only his friends and family, but also concern for us as far as what will happen with the drive-in from this point forward. Hopefully it will continue. I always say to people that I think the two jewels that Earlville has that are not often appreciated is the drive-in and the golf course. I think those are two things that not all, a lot of times not even large communities have, but small communities especially.
There is not another drive-in theater between here and the Mississippi River.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
One thing that Ron Magnoni said in an interview, which I thought was interesting, and we all think that everything that came out of the pandemic was horrible. The drive-in succeeded well when the pandemic was here, because of course everybody didn't want to be around anybody else. They wanted to get out of the house. They wanted to have some entertainment, and so business boomed. And I think from that point on, Magnoni's business was very good. You come out here on a summer weekend now, and the cars will be backed up all the way down Route 34 for some of those, especially the kids' pictures. He was the one that was forced to move into the digital format, and it was a very huge expense for him. I mean, there was even some fundraising around town to try and help with that, but it was successful, and in 2014 he was able to move to that so that he could continue to have first-run theaters, or first-run movies. So the last slide I have here, not the last slide, but of this part, is the Earlville video. Now everybody looked at me like, what the heck do you have Earlville video up there for? Oh, that says 1889. That was 1989, 1999. I put it in last. That was when the electricity was out. I couldn't see what I was doing. Anyway, the only reason I put this up here is because when I was doing the business research, the people that owned this for 10 years, last name, Edgett. So I don't know if there's a family. I'm going to have to stick Carolyn on our researcher to see whether or not there was a relationship between Frank Edgett, who was the first Lyric Theater, and the Mr. and Mrs. Edgett that ran this. So I wanted to conclude this presentation with a look back at some of our Earlville High School graduates who had some success in the film industry. And as you can imagine, Ron and John Dias both grew up in the business, and so I'm sure that's where their inspiration came. But we have some very successful people here. This is Ron Dias, the oldest son of Chuck and Gloria. Graduated in NIU, Indiana, and Ohio University. He was a TV producer for an educational network in the University of Kentucky. Later, as a professor at Cal State, he taught production, broadcast, and film writing, film production, and script writing. His students developed a documentary called Planes of Fame, which received national recognition. There was actually a general from the Pentagon that purchased that and began to distribute it to military bases throughout the world. With his students, they created a television film society, which was one of the largest student groups at Cal State, and they actually honored him with the creation of the Dias Award that's given out. In addition to all that, he sold stories and scripts to Hawaii Five-0 and was a story consultant on Little House on the Prairie. So all things that are pretty impressive to me anyway, and you know, a tribute to his parents and to his going forward in his career. And then John, the younger brother, was a graduate of NIU, worked in marketing for Cornet Films, and was eventually made the Midwest regional manager. So John's career was really more in marketing for them. He was hired by Ames Instructional Media, which is a subsidiary of Paramount in California, as a vice president of marketing, and then he became the part owner of Bar Films in Pasadena, where they had a 17-minute live-action short subject that was nominated for an Academy Award, and it was called A Day in the Life of Bonnie Consolo. And of course, Gary Wolf needs no introduction. We're all very familiar with him. He was from the class of 1959, graduate of the University of Illinois, author of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, which of course we all know became the important film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He was basically the creator of the Toontown universe and authored 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know I don't have all of his books down here, but many that were related to Roger Rabbit, all sci-fi. Space Vulture was one that he co-authored with Bishop John Myers. And then last but not least is Brad Wald, which was happy that Brad was going to be, I asked Brad about to send me a little bio and stuff, and he said, I'm actually going to be in town this weekend. So Brad's here today, Brad's successes are hard to slip on one of these slides, but just as a couple of the things that he has done or roles that he's had was he began his career with Arthur Anderson. He had various roles with Paramount and Turner Pictures, was a managing director and senior vice president of Europe, Mideast, and Africa Comcast International, chief commercial officer for NBC Universal International, CFO and senior vice president of business operations for Leica, and then currently is a COO for Cinesight Animation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but it seems like your career took you down the financial path, and that's how you eventually got into the rest of the production and all that.
Yeah, I graduated from Earlville in 1982. I went to Cal Lutheran, and I was pre-med when I started university, and going to a liberal arts university, Cal Lu, you had to take different classes in different types of disciplines, and I loved the business courses and accounting, and so I continued with that. Became Accounting Association president and student body treasurer, and loved that, and had offers from the big 8 accounting firms at the time, and went with Arthur, and through Arthur Anderson in LA, had a lot of, you could specialize in a different area, and I loved the entertainment projects, and kind of rode the coattails of different managers and partners that had Paramount Pictures and Fox Studios and Disney and all of that, and began a specialization there, and then I got poached and grew initially in film and Paramount, and then that was kind of my trajectory into film and television, business development, a lot overseas, growing European, Middle East, African operations, yeah, right now I manage a 2,400 person studio across the world in 6 countries, producing films and series. So yeah.
It's very cool, and I know that you have kind of gone from, because we talk about Downton Abbey being one of the projects that you were on, but you've kind of, everything's animation now, right? Are you?
Yes, right. So I moved, I began in scripted TV, reality series. I helped build E! Entertainment across the globe. That was a little more kind of unscripted reality shows. Then I got involved in scripted, high-end scripted, and helped develop Downton Abbey and sold that across the world. In fact, when I was in London doing that, some people that you know came over and visited me there, Sandy Cox and Mary Bender, who was a very inspiring teacher to me and really grew my kind of international interest, as well as Miss Hill, Miss Dankenbright, who really kind of piqued my interest in business and accounting. But yeah, Downton Abbey kind of helped that become a worldwide show.
And we're happy about that, for those Downton Abbey fans.
But now it's just animation. So we're as we speak, we're producing 4 feature films, 5 series. It's a busy place. There, with all of the streamers, with not only Netflix but Amazon, Disney Plus. There's so much demand for content that it's a good business these days. Although there's pressure, but yeah, it's fun. And with Leica, that stop motion animation. That was my first. When I was with NBC Universal, Leica's stop motion films were they were a third-party product within our portfolio. And I got to know them, and they asked me to come up to Portland and run their studio. So I moved to Portland for 4 years, and their 500-person studio. We developed 2 films that were on my watch, Kubo and the Two Strings, which was Academy Award nominated where I was, and we won the BAFTA, the British Film and Television Award, and Missing Link, which won the Golden Globe Award. And so that was my kind of foray into animation. and then that led me to where I am now.
Very cool, very cool. Congratulations on your success, because you're one of our proud people, along with the rest of these people that have gone. And I think sometimes we often don't know what each other does. For as much as social media has helped us, I knew that the two Dias boys had some sort of film thing, but until I really looked into it, I didn't know what their successes were. I certainly know about Gary. Well, Gary Wolf has been very good about contributing some of his things to us for here in the museum, and we appreciate your support as well, Brad. But yeah, so thank you.
I love, being a proud Earlvillian and coming back to my roots. And as many of you know, I love coming back. I'm able to spend the summers here working remotely and traveling. And I just love everything that Earlville is. And what you guys do with museum is just to be so proud of in a small town. It's such a wonderful thing that you do, and I love supporting it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad you were able to be with us today. So that's really the end of the presentation, but what I'd like to do is take this time to maybe go through, you don't have to tell us about everything you did at the drive-in or whatever, but if you want to, are there, what other kind of, Jim met his wife there, for crying out loud. What other things, other memories do you have of the Lyric or the, or the drive-in theater, or even farther back of the halls?
The screen blew down on us out, driving and set, later that we could set on with the wind.
Does everybody remember that? That was when we had the tornado that came through the one year, and the screen went down, and of course the big thing was, well, the movie that was playing was Gone with the Wind. So I don't know that was really true, but it made for a good story.
One of the, on the original screen when they were putting it up, the crane was there, lifting it. There was cables on each end of the screen, and to keep from scratching the screen with the cables, John Dias and I got on each end of the screen and put gunny sacks under the cable so that it wouldn't scratch the screen while they was raising the screen in the air.
Cool. How many here recall going to the Lyric Theater for movies? Okay. Bill, you remember that? How come I don't remember that? My mom must not have let me go.
I don't remember going to a movie there.
Okay.
They always had a Christmas program there, and they had Santa Claus on the stage.
Okay.
And I remember going up and getting candy from them. That's my only record.
Okay.
My oldest son used to do the projection of some of the shows
Out at the drive-in? How many people here have ever worked at the drive-in or the Lyric? Was that before or after you met her?
Not before I met her. I met her in 57. She had just moved to town, started working at the concession stand there, and then she also worked at the Lyric downtown.
Okay.
And we married in 58.
Anybody else?
Yeah, John did, Chuck Summers.
Go ahead, Bill.
We used to get beer at Anderson's restaurant there, and sneak it under the fence and drink it in the back row.
Oh, that was you.
That was our wild days.
You were 16 then?
No, I was by 17 or 18.
Yeah. Close.
Jeff did a lot of cooking at that restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah, the back
Yeah.
row.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and close the program. Please stick around and visit with each other. We'd like to have you look around and see. We've done a few things different and here maybe since you were here the last time. So thank you for coming. We really appreciate it, especially if you had power this morning.